So, about 2 months ago, I went out for a family lunch to Nando's with my dad, who identifies himself as a boomer, my mom, who's a Gen X, my younger brother, and my cousin sister, who are both Gen Z. My dad's food arrived first, and him, being the vegetarian that he is, very confidently said, "My food is better than whatever you guys are going to get." To which my brother said, "Appa is capping." My dad looked at me like something unusual was spoken. He made it feel like my brother was speaking a foreign language. And then when our food finally came, my brother took a look at it and said, "It looks low key mid." And then he took his first bite and went, "Damn, bro, cooked." My dad was staring at me the whole way through, hoping I would translate whatever the hell my brother just said because he seemed so lost. Now, this incident was very interesting to me because it seems so that this is an experience that a lot of the older generation seems to have with the younger generations everywhere, at home, on the internet, within their respective communities, and in the workplace as well. You see, with up to 5 generations working together in today's workplace, understanding how each generation communicates isn't just a nice to have, it's a necessity. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Hello, everybody. My name is Lakshan, and I'm your host for this episode.
And I'm Goldie, and this is episode 10 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast.
So, in this episode, we're going to dive into how different generations communicate. We'll break this episode into 3 segments. The first one being the modes and medium of communication, the second one being communication styles, and lastly, the third one being how to bridge this gap. Now, before we get to the first part, I want to make sure that all of us understand what communication actually is. Communication, in a nutshell, is being able to understand and be understood. It's not about language, it's not about the medium, it's not about any fancy words. And unless we really, really get this, there will always be miscommunication and conflicts. Speaking of communication, I want to be understood that it would really, really help us if you could leave a like or a 5-star rating and subscribe to our podcast. Because then our podcast goes higher up in the rankings and it gets pushed out to more people. That way, we will understand what you guys like about our work and what needs to be improved. Now, let's get back to the episode, and we'll start off by talking about how different generations prefer to communicate. First off, we have baby boomers. Now, these guys prefer face to face meetings, phone calls, and formal emails. They value direct interactions because they see it as a sign of respect and professionalism. Then we have the Gen X folk. Now, these guys are very adaptable in how they communicate. They're comfortable with face to face meetings, with phone calls, with emails, with texts, with video, you name it. But they usually prefer whatever medium gets the job done most efficiently. And efficiently for them means getting the most accurate information delivered and it being received in the shortest time possible. Next, we have millennials, who are a lot more comfortable with video calls, instant messaging, and collaborative tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams. They value efficiency and quick responses. And finally, we have Gen Z. Now, these guys are all about instant and visual communication. Think texts, voice notes, and social media. Phone calls aren't really their thing. In fact, there was a recent workplace survey conducted which showed that 75% of Gen Z workers felt anxious about phone calls, while 68% of boomers preferred phone calls over instant messaging. Goldie, what have you noticed in this regard, especially at work?
I think I do resonate with practically every mode of communication that you distinguished in every generation. And essentially, I I want to sort of touch on the motivations of why these generations opt for those type of communications, because we all know what they are doing. It's a very obvious thing we observe, whether it's in my workplace or your workplace with our coaching clients. I've got a myriad of generations I work with. So yes, of course, my Gen Z will always be much more comfortable DMing me, whether it's through their Instagram profiles or even, via WhatsApp, sorry. However, if I have a boomer client, he'll be happy to email me, and it's a lot more formal. But why is that? Do you think it's important we touch on the why? Because I think that would really help our listeners to sort of connect with the reasoning behind the communication styles that are used. And I just want to give a quick brush up on that. For boomers, let's not forget that they come from a time when their ability to communicate was very limited. They were not born into a time when there was anything online technologically apt for them. And they come from a time when anything that they delivered had to be only in one shot. They didn't have the opportunity to edit. Therefore, whatever they sent had to be very clear, very formal. Why? Because they only had one shot at it. So that first impression is last impression goes quite well in this context. Moving on to Gen X, I can identify with this. We grew up writing essays. The number of essays I've written in my life, I can't even tell you, which meant that the way we were focused on structuring our messaging, the way we were, really emphasized on how are you going to deliver the message, meant that storytelling was a big part of our communication. And then we had technology that entered in our adulthood. So we had to suddenly go from writing long essays to doing SMS. SMS is the first form of instant communication, which had limited characters, if you remember. In our days, we only had a certain number of characters. So we had to quickly flip the switch and go from, hold on, I've got a long-winded message here that I've probably typed up or sent a fax. I don't know if you ever grew up with the fax, to suddenly I'm sending an SMS, and this has to be in limited characters only. So let's be quick, let's be efficient, and let's get the message sent as fast as possible. Are you getting the gist of what's happening here, Lakshan? And so then we move on to the millennials, which, as you rightly said, they believe in doing it fast because they were born in technology. So this was a given for them. And finally, we come to Gen Z. Yes, of course, they like it all visual because their attention spans have been limited anyway. So, an image is going to be worth more than 1,000 words for them. Therefore, that's why they believe in going through reels and starting up a conversation, whether they're sharing an image. This happens in our family all the time. My children are constantly sending us photos, and we're supposed to caption them.
Sounds like a lot of fun,
It is. I think it is. And honestly, this idea of thinking that communication can be a hazard or, a problem between generations is the myth that I personally feel very strongly about demystifying today.
Yeah. And everything that you shared, Goldie, with respect to why each generation seems to communicate the way they do, beautifully done, by the way, leads us very, very seamlessly into the next segment of this episode, which is on what are the communication styles of each generation. You touched on why the style is the way it is. I'm going to shed some more light on what the style itself is. So Goldie spoke about how with boomers, they came up at a time when they had to make sure that in the one shot they had to communicate everything as clearly as possible, right? And it shows up in their communication style with respect to how they show up in the workplace and at home also. Because baby boomers happen to be very respect driven communicators. When they communicate formally for the reason that you mentioned, Goldie, and they do it by establishing credibility and with a lot of context, which makes sense because they only had one shot, right? Now, which means that when you reply with an emoji, when they send you a meeting invite, it could seem disrespectful to them. Then we have Gen X, right? Now, unless it's in the context of storytelling, their approach to communication is direct and to the point. They communicate with a lot of clarity and efficiency, and prefer the same from others as well, which again makes sense based on what you said about the generation that wrote the most essays having to be structured and be able to get your point across as concisely and clearly as possible, right? Then we have millennials. And I say we because I'm a millennial technically, we tend to communicate on the foundation of purpose and collaboration. What that means is that we talk about the why behind everything because we also want to be told the why behind everything. And we take a very casual tone while communicating because we see everybody as equal contributors, collaborators rather, and we prefer it to be a dialogue. In fact, if you're too formal with us, we might take offense or feel a little distant. If someone starts behaving and speaking to me very formally, I'll be like, oh, whoa, 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 wait, when did it come to this, bro? Like, it's not that bad, man. And then finally, we have Gen Z, whose approach to communication is authentic and transparent. They also prefer a visual element in how they communicate because it gets the point across faster and it is much more engaging for them. Which means that if your language or delivery is too corporate or inauthentic, they will disengage and check out completely. Goldie, how do you view these communication styles apart from what you already mentioned about about the why as we talk about? As a millennial, I love the fact that you said that.
No, I think it's wonderful to also sort of dive a little bit into earlier millennials and later millennials. There's a slight difference there because of the whole zillennial cohort that we have, covered previously. The earlier millennials still hold a parenting style which comes from don't ask too many questions. It is what it is. Therefore, the way they communicate can borderline a little bit on late Gen Xers, where you're not questioned too much on the why, just get the work done. However, the later millennials, the reason why they have a strong sense of purpose, as you put it, or asking the why behind the what, is because technology was so at hand to them and available. It still continues to be. Suddenly, the questions that they were asking at home were actually not being answered as clearly as perhaps if they Googled it. And so this became a norm for them to question the why behind everything. It was such a standard procedure for them to, look into something and even question certain rituals or religious festivals in certain cultures. But why are we doing this? Let me look it up. It was such a on the go thing to do. Wait, let me Google it. I mean, in today's world, we would say I'll ask ChatGPT, but millennials grew up saying, oh wait, I'm just going to Google that and I'll tell you. And they would even challenge their own parents, which is why I think this purpose driven why type of communication has become a part of their identity. So it's just that little extra spotlight I wanted to add on the millennials. And with regards to the other generations, I think I made myself pretty clear earlier as to what's behind the motivation of them speaking in a certain way. Gen Z definitely befuddled me in many ways because I have a client actually who just yesterday said to me, if I were to leave social media, I wouldn't have any conversation starters left with my friends. And I said, how so? And he said, well, we start conversations through sending each other reels. And then that's what triggers off a conversation, which is fascinating because it's evidently based on a memory or something, an insider joke that they're sharing in common, a meme. And these are the types of things that help them to, initiate those conversations, which otherwise you and I may just send us a simple, hey, what's up? What are you up to? Type text, on WhatsApp.
When you were describing the millennials with respect to the religious rituals, no, it hit so close to home because I did that like a couple of years back with my mom. I was asking her why do we do the things we do because she said no, shut up and just do it. I was not able to wrap my head around it, and I got really frustrated. I had to Google it and found the answer. And the beautiful thing is that once I found the answer, my appreciation for these rituals got so much higher and so much deeper, because I knew, okay, why are we doing this, right? I was able to do it with a lot more engagement and immersion as a result of that. Which, well, in some way brings us to the last segment of our episode, which is on how do we navigate these communication differences. We communicate in different modes and in mediums, and a style that all of us communicate is so different. If we don't find a way to navigate this, it's going to lead to a disaster, as it seems to be in quite a lot of cases, unfortunately. And the way to go about doing that is by first going back to what we define communication as. Communication is being able to understand and be understood, which means everybody involved needs to have the ability to do both of those things. And in order to get that, we need to focus on three things: awareness, adaptability, and alignment. Now, awareness is about learning about each generation, who they are, how they think, why they think the way that they do, how they understand things, and how they receive a message best. Then we have adaptability, which is being able to and willing to change in order to navigate something new. In this context, it's about being able to speak the way that people want to listen. And finally, we have alignment, which is about understanding that everybody wants the same thing, which is something that Goldie says a lot. And I second her on this so much, which is why I literally took her line verbatim and put this here. Because we all have the same shared goals. And what gets in the way of this is a belief that my way is the best way. So the idea is to set up a space in such a way that no one feels like it's us versus them. And instead, we feel like it's us versus what needs addressing. Like I said, Goldie, there is so much I'm sure you can add with regard to this idea. Where would you like to start?
I feel very strongly hit on this message because I've recently lived an experience myself with a Gen Z, and this person is my son. You know, we have always communicated quite seamlessly about lots of topics, and that's something that is one of our core values as a family. But I did find that recently what was kind of breaking our communication was a lot to do with our busy schedules. You know, he's in his second year at college, he's got a lot of things going on. And I did feel there was a little bit of a stress on our communication. He felt it too. So, you know, coming to back to your sort of analogy of awareness, is it adaptability and alignment? Yeah. So I want to use that example to tell you how I put that into practice quite organically, actually, without even knowing about this system that you're mentioning. For me, the awareness came, well, obviously noticing that there was a gap that was being formed, and no longer was WhatsApp or making a phone call or having the occasional video call, you know, 3-4 times a week. It wasn't working. There was something just not right about it. So what I recognized was, where does he spend his time when he's taking a break or just disconnecting from all the stress that he might be going through? And voila, Instagram is the place to be. These kids, they love just maybe doom scrolling in some cases. It's just a way, an outlet, isn't it, for them to sort of look at their reels and check what's going on and have a good laugh. So I decided to become a part of that world, in his world. And I started sending him, just as an experiment, the occasional reel that I felt would resonate with him, that would make him laugh. It had no agenda in terms of, hey, I want to have a chat with you. It was just a way of keeping that in touch feeling. And it worked. And what happened was, I sent him one. He responded almost instantly with, you know, an emoji probably, or a LOL. And then maybe a day later, I got something from him, which he felt that he could share with me. And so on. This has become a momentum for us. It doesn't mean that we don't speak outside of this medium, but we've both recognized that we've had to adapt to each other's styles of life, busy styles of life. And I am an Instagram user. I'm not going to say I'm not. So for me, the adaptability was just second nature. I also send reels to my own friends who are, some of them are my age, a little bit older than me, or even younger. So what was stopping me from doing this with my son? You know, and I think that would be one example that I think sort of perfectly explains how we both decided to get more aligned in wanting the same thing, really, wasn't it? And now it's become an insider thing we have where, you know, a few times a week I will get sort of flooded with his reels and I'll enjoy them. He will get mine. He'll make fun of me as well. He'll ridicule me, but that's all part of the banter, isn't it? To sort of enjoy the relationship in its finest form. So I think that's where communication really just sort of showed up for me recently in such a big way. The answer to your question.
Yeah, lovely. Such a beautiful example. I just want to say that, and I think it perfectly encapsulates the next point that I want to make, which is now we're coming to the conclusion of this episode, and the idea of this whole episode was to talk about how communication across generations isn't about finding one right way or getting people to bend to your way of doing things. It's understanding that boomers prefer to be addressed in a formal manner, usually, and that Gen Xers may want you to get to the point as quickly as possible. Or that if a millennial speaks to you in a casual manner, that's okay. They mean no disrespect. And beyond all of this, it is internalizing the idea that a generation is just a collection of individuals born within the particular period of time. And that the real essence of this is bridging the gap between individuals and being able to do it at scale. And that's how you actually mind the gen gap. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with all your friends and colleagues of all generations. Maybe you can share it in whatever communication medium that you prefer or they prefer. We're talking about that, right? So, with that really bad joke, we've come to the end of episode 10 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Lakshan.
And I've been your co-host, Goldie.
Thank you so much for watching and listening and tuning in to this episode all the way to the very end.
Muchísimas gracias.
Oh. See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.